All right, joined now by Joe McDonald, Bruins writer for Boston Sports Journal. Thanks so much for coming in. You're at the Zdeno Chara presser today, the one-year extension. We expected this, but right move for the player and the team?
Absolutely, Yanni. This is a huge move for the organization. And as you mentioned, they talked about this back during training camp, and they wanted to come to some kind of deal. And it's a perfect deal because it's incentive-laden. It's a $5 million base salary, which is more than he's making this year. This year is the last year of a 7-year deal, and he's making $4 million. So $5 million base and another $1.75 in incentives, which is games played and postseason accomplishments. So it gives the Bruins flexibility from a cap standpoint because they're going to have, as you know, a lot of young guys that are coming up through the organization that are playing in Boston right now. They're going to be coming up soon at the end of their entry-level deals. So with the salary cap era, it works out for both sides.
All right, the Bruins right now playing some good hockey, 1 point back of Tampa. How important is the 1 seed in the East? And as you kind of forecast possible playoff matchups, what do you think? Where do you think they need to land in the standings?
You know, the thing about the Stanley Cup playoffs is it really doesn't matter where you land because the first round is always probably the toughest to get out of. Now, certainly there are certain matchups that you want to stay away from, but the Bruins are playing so well right now that it really doesn't matter who they play. Their goal all along was to catch Tampa. They could do that tomorrow night against them at the Garden. And then they have another game with them next week. So if they finished atop the Atlantic Division, there are 3 teams in the wild card that they could play. If they finish second, they're going to play the Toronto Maple Leafs, which will be a tough series for them only because of Toronto's youth, speed. But without a doubt, if it goes Boston-Toronto, it'll be a 7-game series.
All right, that Tampa Bay game, so big for the standings. How big is it for the Bruins to take over Tampa and win that head-to-head matchup?
Well, because there's a possibility that they could play each other in the second round. And they wanted to set the tone last week when they were in Tampa. And it was a good game. They won 3-0, which was huge because at the time, well, still, Tampa was the #1 team in the division. So right now, they're without Steven Stamkos. It's a possibility he could be back in the lineup for them tomorrow night in Boston, which would be huge for the Lightning. But these games are important the final week of the season because it will set the tone for the postseason because they could play Tampa in the second round. They could play Florida in the first round. So a lot of, even though there's 7 games left, there's still a lot to be decided. All
right, David Beck is Zdeno Chara, Charlie McAvoy, Jake DeBrusk, all close to getting back. What's the injury bug going with right now?
It's crazy. Don Sweeney at Zdeno Chara's press conference today said that with the exception of Rick Nash, all of those guys were on the ice. There's a chance that Zdeno and Charlie McAvoy could be back tomorrow night against the Lightning, but they were all skating today, which is a good sign. And you know, it's not a bad thing that these guys were injured because they get this rest that they've been on, especially a guy like Zdeno Chara, because he's played a lot of hockey in his career. So getting a couple weeks off prior to the Stanley Cup playoffs is huge.
Ryan Donato, 21 years old, going to class at Harvard last week, been so impressive. Did you expect him to be this impactful so early?
I got to tell you, Yanni, first of all, I feel old because when I started my career, I covered his dad, Ted, and now I'm covering his son, which is crazy. Yes, I imagined this kid was going to have this much of an impact, and especially at this time of year when you have a kid coming out of college or coming out of junior or even coming up from the American League, they're running on adrenaline. And that's what we've seen from Donato. And the thing about him is that he has that pedigree, right? He's been around the rink ever since he was born. Really, he's a rink rat. And now we're seeing the accomplishments. And not only with Donato, but with all of the young rookies on this team, the veteran core, which has won a Stanley Cup and has been back to a Stanley Cup a second time, they're feeding off that energy. And right now, especially right now with all the injuries and the Stanley Cup playoffs looming, Donato comes in, makes an impact right away, and these guys are feeding off that.
All right, when you look at the success the Bruins have had this year, obviously some new guys on the roster, Bruce Cassidy's first full year here, just better play in general. Who do you give the most credit to for the turnaround this year?
You know, it's a combination of all those things, Yanni. And when Don Sweeney first came in, a lot of people were critical of the decisions, including me, of the decisions that he was making at the time. And he kept saying, look, we have this 5-year plan, here we go. Even this season, they thought, and I hate to use this term, they thought this was going to be a bridge year because of all the young players. But it meshed very quickly. During the summer, the veteran core decided, look, we know that this league's getting younger. We know our team's getting younger. So we have to accept these guys,
right.
teach them how to be pros at this level, and it's worked. And Bruce Cassidy, you have to give him a ton of credit because he coached a lot of these young guys when he was here in Providence, and he gives them the opportunity to be successful. But he's also not afraid to tell veteran guys, look, you've been terrible tonight. You got to sit on the bench or you're going to be a healthy scratch.
Yeah.
And everything has just worked out very well. And I've been covering this team for almost 20 years, and I got to tell you, I never remember it having this much depth or this much potential going into the Stanley Cup playoffs.
With that being said, best Bruins team since?
Well, probably 2011. I mean, obviously then they had Tim Thomas and
Right.
he was historic goaltending performance, that spring. But probably since then. 2013, they went back to the finals, but they lost to the Blackhawks.
Right.
The following year, they won the President's Trophy. That was probably their best team out of those 2 Stanley Cup runs. So to answer your question, I would say probably since 2014.
All right. And what will make Bruins fans happy? What will make a successful year? They have to be
happy with it right now, honestly. I mean, as I mentioned, this was supposed to be that bridge season. They've accomplished so much this year, and the younger players have had so much development at this level. But I think now that they've reached the Stanley Cup playoffs, that's a successful year. But given the fact, the way they're currently constituted and the success that they're having right now, they should at least get to the Eastern Conference Finals.
Right.
And that's pretty good given all of the injuries that they've dealt with, the adversity, the younger players in the lineup. So I would say Eastern Conference Finals, fans should be happy with.
I think that would be good. First time in the Eastern Conference Finals, right, since 13, right? They'd be in the Eastern.
Correct. Yep.
Last one, I'll get you out on this because he's much maligned, highly critical. Tuukka Rask, are you a fan? Are you one of those critical of his performance? And is he going to step it up for a Stanley Cup run? That's
a huge question, Yanni. And obviously, he hasn't won that big game yet, right? He was the backup under Tim Thomas in 11. He couldn't win that one last game in 13. But he's a Vezina Trophy winner. He's an elite goaltender. He has struggled, but he's the type of goalie, he's a product of the team in front of him, especially the defensive system. And it's playing well right now. But you really can't make that decision until he's the guy that hoists that Stanley Cup. And he could be one of those typical players that his career will be based on whether or not he wins a Stanley Cup here in Boston. So we'll just have to wait and see.
All right, great stuff from Joe McDonald covering the Bruins for Boston Sports Journal. Follow him on Twitter. What's your handle?
Joey Mac Hockey.
Joey Mac Hockey, and he's a Rhode Island guy, so we like having him in on the Sports Route. Much more from the show coming up right after this.